Freedom with Partition 8.1. Quit India Movement, the demise of the civil disobedience movement. Chapter 8 Freedom with Partition 8.1. Quit India Movement. The demise of the civil disobedience movement around 1934 resulted in serious dissension within the Congress, in the same way as it had happened after the withdrawal of the earlier non-cooperation campaign. While Gandhi temporarily withdrew from active politics, the socialists and other leftist elements, the most important of them being Jaya Prakash Narayan, Achuk Patwardhan, Ashok Mehta, Yusuf Mehrali, Narendra Dev and Minu Masani formed in May 1934 the Congress Socialist Party, CSP. His sympathies for socialism notwithstanding, Nehru never formally joined this group, whose ideology, in the words of Sumik Sarkar, ranged from vague and mixed-up radical nationalism to fairly firm advocacy of Marxian, scientific socialism, won the CSP, which rapidly gained in strength in provinces like UP, was meant to operate from within the Congress and try to change its orientation towards a socialist program as well as contain the dominance of the conservative, right-wingers. However, soon the divide within the Congress centered on two issues, i.e., council entry and office acceptance. The rift came to a head, but was somehow avoided at the Lucknow Congress in 1936. Here the majority of the delegates, led by Rajendra Prasad and Vallabhbhai Patel, with the blessings of Gandhi, came round to the view that participation in the elections and subsequent acceptance of office in the provinces under the Act of 1935 would help boost the flagging morale of the Congress, at a time when direct action was not an option. The AICC meeting, August 1936, in Bombay decided in favour of contesting the election, but postponed the decision on office acceptance until the election was over. The results of the election in 1937, for which both the right and left-wingers campaigned jointly, were outstanding for the Congress, see Chapter 6.4, and this was followed out by the AICC sanctioning office acceptance in March by overriding the objections of Nehru and other CSP leaders. Gandhi, by taking one of his remarkable compromise positions, endorsed the decision, while reposing his faith in non-violent and constructive program from outside the legislatures. Nehru's opposition hinged on the argument that by running the provincial governments, the Congress would be responsible for keeping the imperialist structure functioning, and thereby would be letting down the masses whose high spirits the Congress itself had once helped in boosting up. Within a few years he was to be proved prophetic. The Congress won the election in 1937 by targeting the newly enfranchised voters, who included sections of the industrial working class and sections of the peasantry, including some of the Dalit. But the achievements of the Congress ministries during the next 2 years frustrated all these groups. We have noted earlier, Chapter 7.2, how Dalit and their leaders were not impressed by the few caste disabilities removal and temple entry bills that constituted the token legislative programs of the Congress ministries, offering nothing more than mere window dressing. We have also noticed, Chapter 7.4, how Congress victory had aroused the hopes and aspirations of the industrial working class, leading to increased labor militancy and industrial unrest in Bombay, Gujarat, UP and Bengal, at a time when the Congress was being decisively drawn into a closer friendship with the Indian capitalists. This resulted in a perceptible anti-labor shift in Congress attitudes, epitomized in the passage of the Bombay Trades Disputes Act in 1938. Equally significant were the developments on the peasant front, where the rising militancy before the elections were harnessed by the Congress to win the race, but later it found it difficult to rise up to the expectations of its Kisan, peasant, voters who were hoping for some radical changes in the existing agrarian relations. The Kisan Sabha movement started in Bihar under the leadership of Swami Sahajanand Saraswati, who had formed in 1929 the Bihar Provincial Kisan Sabha, BPKS, in order to mobilize peasant grievances against the zamindari attacks on their occupancy rights. Initially, the BPKS, by Sahajanand's own admission, was meant to promote class harmony, so that the escalating landlord-tenant friction did not jeopardize the nationalist broad front. But when it was revived again in 1933, it increasingly came under the influence of the socialists, so that by 1935 it adopted abolition of zamindari as one of its programs. By this time the BPK's membership had risen to 33,000.3. It is also important to remember that this Kisan movement sought to construct a broad front of the peasantry. Although the rich occupancy tenants provided it with the leadership and its main support base, it attracted a fair amount of participation from the middle and poorer peasants as well. Around the same time, the Kisan Sabha movement also gained in momentum in central Andhra districts under the leadership of the CSP activist N.G. Ranga. He organized a number of peasant marches in 1933-34, and under his stewardship at the Ellore Zamindari Riots Conference in 1933 the demand was raised for the abolition of zamindari. In 1935 Ranga and EMS Nambudripa tried to spread the peasant movement to other linguistic regions of Madras Presidency, organized a South Indian Federation of Peasants and Agricultural Labour and initiated the discussion for an All India Peasant Body. Also in the neighbouring province of Orissa, which was created in 1936 under the new constitutional arrangements. The Utkal Kisan Sangh had been formally established in 1935 under the leadership of the Congress Socialists, who were organizing, in the coastal districts of Cuttack, Puri and Balasore, militant peasant movements around some radical demands. In its very first conference, abolition of zamindari was given a programmatic expression in one of its resolutions. All these radical developments on the peasant front culminated in the formation of the All India Kisan Sabha, AIKS, at the Lucknow session of the Congress in April 1936, with Sahajanand Saraswati elected as its first president. The Kisan Manifesto, which was adopted in August, contained radical demands, such as the abolition of zamindari, graduated income tax on agricultural income, granting of occupancy rights to all tenants and scaling down of interest rates and debts. A number of CSP leaders and communists is equal to following the 1935 Comintern decision to follow a united front strategy on the AIKs and helped in consolidating the movement where it already existed, such as UP, Bihar and Orissa, and also in extending the movement to other provinces, such as Bengal, where a provincial Kisan Sabha was started in March 1993-7. It was also because of its CSP members that the AIKs remained a part of the Congress and maintained close relationship with the provincial Congress committees. The Congress too was given a more radical orientation by its socialist members. In the Fajpur session in December 1936 the Congress finally adopted an agrarian program. There was also a marked shift towards the democratic and anti-feudal movements in the princely states. The All India States People's Conference, which had been formed in 1927 to coordinate nationalist movement in the native states, so far received apathetic treatment from the Congress. Indeed, the 1934 Bombay Congress had specifically resolved to follow a non-interventionist policy in the states. But this began to change from 1936 when Nehru attended the fifth session of the States People's Conference and stressed need for mass movement. In October 1937 the AICC resolved to provide moral and material support to the people's movements in the states. But Gandhi still remained cautious. He did not like this shift and wanted the whole policy to be reviewed at the next Congress session at Haripura. Obviously, this ascendancy of the left within the Congress was not liked by the right-wingers like Vallabhbhai Patel, Bholabhai Desai, C. Rajgopal Bari or Rajendra Prasad, who still preferred constitutional politics to radical agitation, and also by the committed Gandhians who believed in constructive program. However, with the election approaching, they could hardly ignore the organizational basis created by the provincial Kisan Sabhas, and under leftist pressure in some provinces they agreed to include abolition of zamindari in their election manifesto. In the election of 193-7 the socialists and the right-wing leaders acted in unison, and reaped its benefits in the spectacular Congress victories, which were quite unexpected in some provinces. So when after July 1937 the Congress ministries began to take over office in the 8 provinces, it was hailed by the rural masses as an emancipatory experience marked by the institution of an alternative authority. But while the ministry formation raised great expectations and brought in greater militancy among the peasantry, it also brought the right-wingers back to power, and they now tried to retrieve the Congress from the clutches of the socialists. In the province of Bihar, where the IGSN Sabha began to organize a powerful peasant movement around the issue of Baksht land where permanent tenancies had been converted into short-term tenancies in recent years, the Conservative Congress leadership renegotiated their alignment with the landlords and entered into formal agreements with them. When the proposed tenancy legislations of the Congress were significantly watered down because of landlord pressure, the peasants were not impressed and they staged in 1938-39 a militant movement under the leadership of the Kisan Sabha for the restoration of the Baksht lands. The movement that spread over large parts of Bihar was strongest in the Riora and Manjihiavan regions of the Gaya district, in Chapra in Sahabad, in Bahia in Manya and among the Santai Bataidas in the Kosi Daira region. Participation cut across caste and class barriers, bringing in both Dalit and Pura landless agricultural workers, along with the richer Bhumihar and Rajput peasantry. In its basic ideological thrust, the movement was reformist, as claimed by Stephen Henningham VII, as it did not threaten the zamindari system, but only sought to restore some pre-existing Conference, ISPC, founded in 1927. Although the states could never remain totally insulated from the political waves of British India, the princes remained steadfast loyalists to their imperial protectors, trying to keep the nationalist agitation at bay. In the late 1930s, therefore, the Congress left-wingers, like Bose and Nehru, became more insistent on the desirability of greater intervention in the princely states, in order to bring them at par with the political developments in British India. 12 The right-wingers too now possibly, as surmised by Ian Copeland, 1999, began to dream of power at the proposed federal centre, and for that they required the princes to nominate their representatives from among people close to the Praja Mandals. Such a confluence of ideas and ambitions resulted in a significant policy shift at the Haripura Congress in 1938, where a resolution was adopted to support the people's movements in the states. Although no organizational assistance was to be provided, individual leaders could participate, under the overall leadership of a special subcommittee of the Congress Working Committee. In February 1939, Nehru accepted the presidency of the ISPC and the Tripuri Congress endorsed the scheme of joint action. As a result of this evolving situation, in late 1938 and early 1939 many of the princely states witnessed an unprecedented escalation of popular agitation, spearheaded by the local Praja Mandals, clandestine Congress branches and outside political leaders from British India. Significant agitation took place in Mysore, Jaipur, Rajkot, Travancore, Kashmir and Hyderabad, Gandhi himself taking a leading role in Rajkot. While some states like Mysore and Rajkot became more conciliatory and made token concessions, the larger states resisted the pressure resolutely, with help coming, although belatedly, from the British authorities. As a result of such confrontational line-up, peaceful demonstrations soon deteriorated into numerous acts of violence, and later into communal conflicts in southern Deccan, forcing Gandhi to withdraw the movement in April 1939. The situation was again back to normal by autumn. As mentioned earlier, Chapter 6.5, the major political fallout of this sudden flare-up was the stiffening of princely opposition to the proposed federation idea of the Act of 1935. On the other end too, the issue of federation became the cause of a major rift between the Congress old guards and their left-wing critics, and it came to a head in the period between the Haripura Congress in March 1938 and the Tripuri Congress in March the following year. It centered on the re-election of the Congress President Subhas Chandra Bose, whose militant anti-federation irked the conservatives. Bose contested the election defying Gandhi's wishes, and emerged victorious, defeating Gandhi's own candidate, Pattavi Sitaramaiah. As B.R. Tomlinson describes it, the election was fought out in ideological terms: right versus left, pro-federation versus anti-federation, pro-ministry versus anti-ministry. 15 Gandhi took it as his personal defeat, and 12 of the 15 members of the working committee resigned immediately. The showdown came at the Tripuri Congress, where a resolution was passed censoring Bose for raising allegations against the Gandhians that they would sell out on the federation issue. Gandhi asked him to constitute his own working committee and refused all cooperation. Bose tried to patch up a compromise but failed, and ultimately at the AICC meeting in Calcutta in April 1939 he resigned and was quickly replaced by Rajendra Prasad. Bose then formed his own forward bloc, as a left party within the Congress, but it did not gain much strength outside his own province of Bengal. When he staged a protest against the AICC decision to ban congressmen from participating in civil disobedience without the prior permission of provincial Congress committees, the working committee at Gandhi's insistence punished him for indiscipline. In August 1939 he was removed from all Congress positions, notably the presidency of the Bengal PCC, and was banned from holding any executive office for 3 years. Later in January 1940, Gandhi wrote to C.F. Andrews describing Subhas as "my son, but a spoilt child of the family, who needed to be taught a lesson for his own good." 16 Bose's virtual expulsion, however, did not mean that Congress was about to fall apart, although it definitely signified a reassertion of authority by the right-wingers. The socialists were weakened within the Congress, but could not be completely weeded out. Although some members at this stage clearly preferred autonomy, the AIKs still remained a part of the Congress. But the expectations and militancy that its members had once generated among the masses had been clearly dampened by the conservative policies of the Congress ministries. The Congress itself began to lose its popularity, as indicated in the drastic fall in its membership, from 4.5 million in 1938 to 39 to 1.4 million in 1940-4111. It was this sense of popular frustration combined with the growing militant mood that prepared the ground for the next round of mass movement in India in 1942. The outbreak of World War II in September 1939 brought in new variables in Indian politics. The war brought changes in British policies and changes in Congress strategies too. Viceroy Lord Linlithgow associated India with England's declaration of war. H.T. Disease and pain. There was a widespread fear that if Japan invaded, the British would do the same in India. And that seemed no longer a distant possibility, as the British initiated a harsh denial policy in coastal Bengal by destroying all means of communications, including boats and cycles, paying very little compensation. From May 1942, American and Australian soldiers began to arrive in India and soon became the central figures in stories of rape and racial harassment of civilian population. Rumors were rife, both fed by the Axis propaganda machine, and by Subhas Bose's Azad Hind Radio, broadcast from Berlin from March 1942, more in Chapter 8.2. By the middle of the year there was a widespread popular belief in India that British power was going to collapse soon, and therefore it was the opportune moment for a fight to the finish and to liberate India from nearly 200 years of colonial rule. Gandhi was not slow to feel this popular mood of militancy and realized that the moment of his final engagement with the Raj had arrived. "Leave India to God," Gandhi wrote in May 1942. "If that is too much, then leave her to anarchy. This ordered disciplined anarchy should go, and if there is complete lawlessness, I would risk it." 19. He briskly set aside all opposition from within the Congress against direct action, coming mainly from Nehru and Rajgopalachari, and prepared the party for the final struggle, "the biggest fight in my life." 20. In July, the Congress Working Committee approved of a draft resolution on mass as opposed to individual civil disobedience. The "Quit India" resolution, adopted by the AICC in Bombay on 8 August 1942, proposed to begin this mass civil disobedience under Gandhi's direction, if power was not immediately handed over to the Indians. On this occasion, Gandhi delivered his famous "Do or Die" speech, arguing that this was the final battle, a fight to the finish, and so the Indians must win independence or give up their lives for it. This fired the imagination of an already rankled Indian population, expecting a breakdown of the established authority. As Gyanendra Pandey puts it, Gandhi provided them with a psychological break, by asserting that everyone should henceforth consider themselves as free man or woman, and should choose their own course of action if the leaders were arrested. 21. His fear proved to be true, as all front-ranking leaders of the Congress, including Gandhi, were arrested in the early morning of 9 August, and this was followed by unprecedented mass fury that goes by the name of August Revolution in nationalist legends. The unusual intensity of the movement surprised everyone. Viceroy Linley described it as, by far the most serious rebellion since 185,711.22. It was violent and totally uncontrolled from the very beginning, as the entire upper echelon of the Congress leadership was behind bars even before it began. And therefore, it is also characterized as a spontaneous revolution, as no preconceived plan could have produced such instantaneous and uniform results. The history of the Quit India movement as revealed in recent studies shows that it was not just an impulsive response of an unprepared populace, although the unprecedented scale of violence was by no means premeditated by the Congress leadership, as was claimed by the government. First of all, the last 2 decades of mass movement which in the recent past had been conducted on a much more radical tone under the leadership of the various associated and affiliated bodies of the Congress, like the ATAC, CSP, AIKs and the Forward Bloc had already prepared the ground for such a conflagration. The Congress leaders before 9 August had drafted a 12-point program which not only included the usual Gandhian methods of Satyagraha, but a plan to promote industrial strikes, holding up of railways and telegraphs, non-payment of taxes and setting up of parallel government. Several versions of this program were in circulation among Congress volunteers, including the one prepared by the Andhra Provincial Congress Committee, which contained clear instructions for such subversive action. However, compared to what actually happened, even this was a cautious program. But then, as the movement progressed, the AJCC continued to issue instructions to peasants, which outlined the course of action anticipating what was to eventuate in the later months of the movement. 24. On the question of non-violence, Gandhi this time was remarkably ambivalent. "I do not ask from you my own non-violence. You can decide what you can do in this struggle," said Gandhi on 5 August. 3 days later on the 8th, speaking on the AICC resolution, he urged, "I trust the whole of India today to launch upon a non-violent struggle. But even if people deviated from this path of non-violence," he assured, I shall not swerve. I shall not flinch. 2s In other words, the issue of non-violence seemed to have been of lesser importance in 1942 than the call for do or die, or the invitation to make a final sacrifice for the liberation of the nation. 26 The people accepted the challenge and interpreted it in their own ways, and these interpretations were to some extent influenced by the lower level, often unknown, Congress leaders and students, who took over the leadership after the national and provincial leaders were all arrested between 9 and 11 August. There is no denying that the Congress and Gandhi at this important historical juncture unquestionable symbolic legitimacy in popular mind. Whatever happened, happened in their name. But Congress as an organization and Gandhi as a person had little control over these happenings. In the words of Gyanendra Pandey, Gandhi was the undisputed leader of a movement over which he had little command. 27 Sumik Sarkar has identified three phases of the Quit India movement. It initially started as an urban revolt, marked by strikes, boycott and picketing, which were quickly suppressed. In the middle of August, the focus shifted to the countryside, which witnessed a major peasant rebellion, marked by destruction of communication systems, such as railway tracks and stations, telegraph wires and poles, attacks on government buildings or any other visible symbol of colonial authority, and finally, the formation of national governments in isolated pockets. This brought in severe government repression, forcing the agitation to move underground. The third phase was characterized by terrorist activities, which primarily involved sabotaging of war efforts by dislocating communication systems and propaganda activities by using various means, including a clandestine radio station run by hitherto unknown Usha Mehta from somewhere in India. Not only the educated youth participated in such activities, but also bands of ordinary peasants organized such subversive actions by night, which came to be known as the Karnataka method. What is important, these so-called terrorists enjoyed enormous popular support and patronage, so that the definition of underground in British official parlance virtually got expanded to cover the entire nation, as no Indian could anymore be trusted by the authorities. As time passed, underground activities came to be channeled into three streams, with a radical group under the leadership of Jaya Prakash Narayan organizing guerrilla warfare at India-Nepal border, a centrist group led by Congress socialists like Aruna Asaf Ali mobilizing volunteers throughout India for sabotage activities, and a Gandhian group led by Sucheta Kripalni and others emphasizing non-violent action and constructive program. 29 In the Quit India movement there was use of violence at an unprecedented scale, and the government used it as a justification for repression. The wartime emergency powers were taken advantage of to use the army. For the first time, as many as 57 battalions of British troops were deployed to crush what was essentially a civilian agitation. Churchill could defend this swift and ruthless repression and silence a critical world opinion by citing the needs of war. By the end of 1942, the August Revolution had been thoroughly crushed, with nearly 92,000 people arrested by the in eastern UP, in districts of Ghazipur and Azamgarh. The arrival of student volunteers from the Banaras Hindu University, though even rumor of their arrival galvanized the local peasantry into action, destroying railway tracks and stations and burning papers in the Court of Ward office. However, in many places in these districts, like the Sherpur Mohammadabad region, as Gyanendra Pandey puts it, the message of destruction and the Gandhian principle of non-violence coexisted uneasily, as some committed Gandhian leaders sought to maintain its non-violent purity. 31 The mass insurrection was much more intense in the district of Balia, where British rule ceased to exist for a few days, but here too contradictions weakened the movement. The story was not much dissimilar, as student leaders arriving from Bhopal and Allahabad University, the latter in a hijacked Azad, Liberty, train inspired the peasantry into action. Several thousands of them attacked and looted the railway station and a military supply train at Bilkhara Road on 14 August, took over the Thana and Tahsil buildings at Bansadi town 4 days later, with the local station officer and Tahsildar offering no resistance, and the local Congress leader trying to establish a parallel administration. And then on 19 August, a huge crowd besieged the Ballia town, asking its Indian district magistrate to bomb all currency notes in the treasury and free all political prisoners. The released Gandhian leader Chittu Pandey hereafter took control of the movement and was proclaimed the Swaraj Ziladbish or independent district magistrate, who did not however know what to do next. So when on the following day the army arrived, the leaders all fled and the whole town of Ballia lay deserted. The Quit India movement here thus came to a rather anticlimactic end, due to a lack of leadership. In contrast to Bihar and eastern UP, the Quit India movement was less instantaneous and intense, but more prolonged in other regions of India. In Bengal, the movement took place in Calcutta and in the districts of Hooghly, Bankura, Purulia, Birbhum and Dinajpur, in the latter district marked by the participation of Santals and Dalit groups like Rajbansis and Paliyas. But it was undoubtedly strongest in Tamluk and Kontai, Kanti, subdivisions of Midnapur where, as Hikesranjan Sanyal has commented, national movement had by 1930 become a part of the popular culture among peasants. 33 and they had been further organized in recent past by the Krishak Sabhas and Forward Bloc. Since April 1942, in the coastal areas of Midnapur the government destroyed nearly 18,000 boats in pursuance of its denial policy, and this not only deprived the peasants of their vital means of communication, but also impacted very badly on the HT. Politics like Rajgopalachari opposed the movement, but because of various other factors, such as the strength of constitutionalism, absence of the socialists, opposition of the Kerala communists, indifference of the non-Brahmins and a strong southern challenge to a political campaign dominated by the north. But what was more significant, there were important social groups who consciously stayed away from the movement. The most important of them were the Muslims, who stood aloof from the campaign almost in all regions, and therefore, the Muslim League, which did not approve of the movement, could claim that it represented the majority of the Indian Muslims. But although their abstention was nearly universal, the Muslims did not oppose Quit India actively, except perhaps in some parts of Gujarat, and there was no major incident of communal conflict throughout the whole period. On the other hand, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, the leader of the Dalits, who had joined the Viceroy's Executive Council as a Labour member just before the onset of the campaign, also did not support it. But once again, although many of his supporters did not join, we have evidence of Dalit participation in the Quit India movement in various regions, and cross-caste unity was never a rare occurrence in this campaign, as shown earlier. It is also important to remember that the Hindu Mahasabha too condemned the Quit India movement as sterile, unmanly and injurious to the Hindu cause, and stalwart Hindu leaders like V.D. Savarkar, B.S. Munjay and Shyama Prasad Mukherjee wholeheartedly supported British war efforts that were allegedly being raked by the Congress campaign. But despite this official line, a strong group of Mahasabha members led by N.C. Chatterjee seemed eager to participate in it, and under their pressure the Mahasabha Working Committee had to adopt a face-saving but vague resolution stating that defense of India could not be supported unless freedom of India was recognized with immediate effect. 39 The other Hindu organization, RSS, which until now had its main base in Maharashtra, remained aloof as well. As the Bombay government noted in a memo, the Sun has scrupulously kept itself within the law, and in particular, has refrained from taking part in the disturbances that broke out in August 1942-40 the Communist Party of India, following the involvement of Soviet Russia in the war in December 1941, became another important political group which did not support Quit India movement because of their People's War strategy. The British government, then anxious to find any group that could embarrass the Congress and support war efforts, promptly withdrew the ban on the sea. Had been in place since 1934, and the latter now started preaching in favor of war efforts to contain fascism. However, despite this official line, there is ample evidence to show that many individual communists were swayed by the patriotic emotions of the day and actively participated in the Quit India movement. And on the other hand, the trade unions and Kisan Sabhas, which the communists controlled, began to lose their popularity and support, as the leaders found it difficult to convince their followers the logic of supporting a distant war by subverting a campaign for their own freedom. It is possible to argue that when the Dalit peasants or other poorer classes participated in the Quit India movement, their motivation was different from those of the educated youth and the middle peasant castes. But it is too simplistic to describe the movement as a dual revolt, because despite variance in vision, the different classes and communities were also united in common action against the British. Watching Patna city on 11th August, a confounded communist leader Rahul Sankrityayan observed in utter astonishment that the leadership had passed on to the rickshaw pullers, ekka drivers and other such people whose political knowledge extended only this far, that the British were their enemies. 43 It was this commonly shared dominant tone of anti-imperialism that united everyone in 1942, and in the villages it even overshadowed the anti-feudal tendencies that appeared from time to time in different parts of the country. The Quit India movement, by promising immediate freedom from an oppressive imperial order, had thus captured the imagination of a significant section of the Indian population, notwithstanding their differing perceptions of freedom. The Quit India movement also provided important lessons for the Congress. First of all, the defeat discredited the left-wingers who had been demanding action. Gandhi, on the other hand, was in a dilemma. Congress volunteers were justifying violence by referring to his own dictum that it was justifiable in self-defense. He did not condone violence, but did not formally condemn it either. Instead, he held the government responsible for the outbreak of violence. Indeed, neither he nor any other Congress leaders had any control over the people and the volunteers, nor any of them had anticipated the kind of response the Quit India movement had generated. To the Indian masses in 1942, Gandhi and Congress were symbols of liberation, not sources of ideological constraint. Gandhi's 21-day fast commencing on 10 February 1943 restored symbolically his centrality in the movement once again, but not as a controlling figure, nor did he insist on the surrender of the underground leader. Enthusiastic response. Back in Bengal, he forged a link with the Muslim League, and decided to launch a civil disobedience movement to destroy the Holwell monument that stood in Calcutta as a reminder of a black hole tragedy which most people believed did never happen and was invented only to tar the memory of Sirajuddaula, the last independent ruler of Bengal. It was a campaign that had an obvious appeal to the Muslims and thus could further strengthen the Hindu-Muslim pact in Bengal. But before it could start, he was arrested by the British on 3 July 1940 under the Defence of India Act. The Holwell monument was later removed, but Bose remained incarcerated until he threatened to start a hunger strike in December. 47 He was then released unconditionally, but kept under constant surveillance. In the meanwhile, war progressed in Europe, and Bose believed that Germany was going to win. Although he did not like their totalitarianism or racism, he began to nurture the idea that the cause of Indian independence could be furthered with the help of the Axis powers and started exploring various possibilities. Finally, in the midnight of 16 to 17 January 1941 he fled from his Elgin Road residence in Calcutta incognito as an upcountry Muslim. He travelled to Kabul and then through Russia on an Italian passport, By the end of March he reached Berlin. 48 Subhas Bose met Goebbels and Hitler in Berlin, but did not receive much help from them. He was allowed to start his Azad Hind radio and was handed over the Indian POWs captured in North Africa to start an Indian Legion, but nothing beyond that. Particularly, he could not get an Axis declaration in favor of Indian independence, and after German reverses at Stalingrad, that became even more difficult. 49 But in the meanwhile, a new stage of action was being prepared for him in Southeast Asia, where the Japanese were taking real interest in the cause of Indian independence. India originally did not figure in the Japanese policy of Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere, under which the Japanese proposed to help Asians gain independence from Western imperialism. But by 1940 Japan had developed an India policy and the following year sent Major Fujiwara to Southeast Asia to contact expatriate Indians who were organizing themselves into the Indian Independence Leagues under the leadership of men like Pritam Singh. Then, in December 1941, Captain Mohan Singh, a young officer of the Punjab Regiment of the British Indian Army who had surrendered to the Japanese in the jungles of Malaya, agreed to cooperate with Fujiwara to raise an Indian army with POWs to march alongside the Japanese to liberate India. In June 1942, a United Indian Independence League, https://telegram.me/upsc materials http representing all Indians in Southeast Asia, was born as a civilian political body having controlling authority over the army. To chair this body, Rash Bihari Bose, a veteran Bengali revolutionary then living in Japan, was flown in. By September, the INA was formally in existence. But its relationship with the Japanese was still far from satisfactory, as Japanese duplicity now became more than apparent. So General Tojo, the Japanese Prime Minister, made a declaration in the Diet supporting Indian independence. But beyond that, the Japanese were only prepared to treat INA as a subsidiary force, rather than an allied army. As Mohan Singh insisted on autonomy and allied status, he was removed from command and put under arrest. Rash Bihari Bose tried to hold the banner for some time, but he was then too aged for the task. By the beginning of 1943 the first INA experiment virtually collapsed. As Mohan Singh had often mentioned to the Japanese, the INA movement needed a new leader, and outside India only one person could provide that leadership, and that was Subhas Chandra Bose. The Japanese now seriously considered the proposition and negotiated with the Germans to bring him to Asia. At last, after a long and arduous submarine voyage, in May 1943 Bose arrived in Southeast Asia and immediately took control of the situation, with Japanese assurance of help and equal treatment. In October, he established a provisional government of Free India, which was immediately recognized by Japan and later by 8 other governments, including Germany and Fascist Italy. And he became the supreme commander of its army, the Azad Hind Fauj, Free India Army, or the Indian National Army, which recruited around 40,000 men by 1945s1 and had a women's regiment named after the legendary Rani of Jhansi of 1857 fame. See Chapter 7.5. The provisional government declared war on Great Britain, and its chief ambition was to march as an allied army with the Japanese through Burma to Imphal, in Manipur, and then to Assam, where the Indian people were expected to join them in an open rebellion to liberate their mother country. But the Imphal campaign, which was finally launched on 8 March 1944 by Japan's Southern Army accompanied by 2 INA regiments, ended in a disaster. The reasons were many, as Joyce Libra enumerates them: the lack of air power, breakdown in the chain of command, disruption of the supply line, the strength of Allied offensive, and finally for the INA, lack of cooperation from the Japanese. The retreat was even more devastating, finally ending the dream of liberating India through military campaign. But Bose still remained optimistic, thought of regrouping, and after Japanese https://telegram.me/ups surrender, contemplated seeking help from Soviet Russia. The Japanese agreed to provide him transport up to Manchuria from where he could travel to Russia. But on his way, on 18 August 1945 at Taihoku Airport in Taiwan, he died in an air crash, which many Indians still believe never happened. But IFINA's military campaign was over after a last valiant engagement at Mount Popa in Burma. Its political impact on India was yet to unfold itself after their surrender. The 20,000 INA soldiers were interrogated and transported back to India. Those who appeared to have been persuaded or misled by Japanese or INA propaganda classified as whites and greys were either released or rehabilitated in the army. But a few of them, at least the most committed and categorized as blacks, were to be court-martialed. Not to try them would be to give indication of weakness, and to tolerate treason would be to put the loyalty of the Indian army at risk. So altogether 10 trials took place, and in the first and most celebrated one at Red Fort in Delhi, 3 officers P.K. Sahgal, G.S. Dillon and Shah Nawaz Khan were charged of treason, murder and abetment of murder. The trial would take place in public, as this was expected to reveal the horrors that these INA men had perpetrated and that, the government hoped, would swerve public opinion against them. But as the events subsequently unfolded, the government, it seemed, had completely miscalculated the political fallout of the INA trials. As the press censorship was lifted